first time I saw the rune, I thought I was still dreaming. I was on my knees in a field of black snow, breath steaming in a sky that had no stars. The trees around me were made of bone and glass, and every branch chimed when the wind passed through. Something enormous moved beyond the tree line, slow as a continent, its shadow dragging across the snow like a tide. I tried to stand, but my feet were sunk as if the ground wanted to keep me. Then, a voice spoke from behind my ear. Not words, a feeling, a command that entered my blood the way cold enters skin. Turn around. I did, because nightmares always make you obey. The creature's face was too close, impossibly close, as if the world had folded just to bring its mouth to mine. It had no eyes, only a smooth mask of dark, and in the center of its forehead burned a symbol that throbbed like a wound. It lifted one long finger, pressed it to my brow, and I felt the rune sear into me with a heat so sharp I tasted iron. Mine, the nightmare said without speaking. I screamed myself awake. Moonlight lay across my room in pale stripes, and my sheets were twisted as if I had fought someone in my sleep. My heart hammered so hard my ribs hurt. For a moment I lay still, listening to the quiet of my mother's house, listening for the impossible chime of bone branches, for the slow movement of something vast outside the window. Nothing. Only the distant river and the whisper of night insects. I exhaled, laughing once in relief, and brought my hand to my forehead to wipe away sweat. My fingers stopped. There was a raised line of skin there, warm to the touch. Not a bruise, not a scratch, a shape. Even before I found the mirror, I knew what I would see, because I could still feel the creature's finger on my brow as clearly as if it had never left. The rune was a crescent split by 3 jagged slashes, like a crown broken and sharpened into claws. It sat above my left brow, faintly luminous, the way foxfire glows on rotting wood. When I leaned closer, it pulsed in time with my heartbeat. I stared until my eyes watered. I am Leora of the Silver Grove, an elf maiden, as ordinary as anyone can be in a world where trees remember and rivers carry songs. I have woven winter cloaks and brewed healing teas and danced at solstice fires. I have never bargained with anything that lives in shadows, but that rune was not a mark of our people. In our villages, marks are earned in sunlight. A hunter's braid for their first stag, a healer's knot for their first life saved, a star-ink dot behind the ear for those who swear loyalty to the moon court. This was none of those. This was a stain. I tried to scrub it away until my skin burned. I tried poultices of moon mint and ash. I tried salt and silver water. Nothing faded it. If anything, it brightened, as though my fear fed it. By dawn, my mother noticed the way I kept my hair draped forward and my face angled away from the light. "Leora," she said gently, hands still wet from kneading bread. "What have you done?" I showed her. The color drained from her cheeks so fast it was like watching a candle gutter. She reached toward my brow, then pulled back, as if the rune might bite. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." My mother has always been brave. She once stood between a boar and my little brother with only a broom in her hands. She has faced storms that uprooted oaks. I had never seen her look at me like that, like I was already half gone. "It's just a dream," I said, forcing steadiness into my voice. "It came after a nightmare. It will fade." But she didn't believe me, and the worst part was that something in my bones didn't believe me either. Word travels in elflands the way smoke travels through a forest. By midday, 3 neighbors had come to our door with excuses that didn't fool anyone. By evening, old Aaron, the root singer, arrived with his cane and his quiet eyes. He studied the rune without touching it. He muttered phrases in a language older than our village. Then he sat heavily at our table and stared at his own, hands as if they had betrayed him. "Nightmare glyph," he said at last. My mother made a sound that was almost a sob. Aaron lifted his eyes to me. In them I saw pity and something worse. Recognition. There are places between dreams, Leora. Places that press against the edge of our world, like a tongue against teeth. Things live there that want names, and faces, and doors. Most never find purchase. Most never mark anyone. He swallowed. His throat bobbed. But when they do, it means they have noticed you. And when something like that notices you, it does not forget. I wanted to argue. I wanted to laugh in his face and call it superstition. Instead, I heard very faintly a chime, not in the room, in my skull. I jerked my head toward the window, and for a heartbeat I saw the orchard beyond our house the way I had seen the nightmare forest. Branches too sharp, shadows too thick, the moon too near. Then it was normal again. I grabbed the edge of the table until my knuckles whitened. Aaron saw, and his mouth tightened. "You've begun to thin," he said. "That's what the mark does. It makes you reachable. My mother reached across the table and took my hand, gripping it too hard. "We will go to the moon court," she said. "The prince's mages. They will know what to do." Aaron's laugh was dry as dead leaves. "The moon court does not welcome cursed villagers. Not these days. Not since the dream plague began." Dream plague. I had heard the whispers in the market, people waking with blood on their tongues, children crying that someone else was in their heads, a merchant from the east who walked into a river because he said the water was calling him by name. I had never thought it would touch me. That night I tried not to sleep. I sat in my room with a lamp and a knife and my back to the wall, as if steel could protect me from a place that wasn't fully real. But exhaustion is its own kind of spell. My eyes closed without permission. The nightmare took me immediately. Black snow, bone trees, the scent of iron. This time I didn't kneel. I stood, trembling, and stared into the darkness beyond the tree line. Something moved, and the ground vibrated. The creature came forward, dragging its shadow like a cloak. It did not need to be close for me to feel it now. The rune on my brow burned as if it recognized its maker. The creature lifted its hand. "Come," it seemed to say. "Come, come, come." And the rune answered. My body leaned forward. My foot slid across the snow. I fought it, every muscle screaming, and for a moment I held still. Then the creature's mouth opened, and the darkness inside it spilled out like ink into water. It poured toward me, cold and thick, reaching for my face. I woke with a gasp so violent I almost choked. My lamp had gone out. The room was darker than it should be. Moonlight poured through the window, too bright, too sharp, and on the glass, just for an instant, a symbol glowed back at me from the outside. The same crescent, the same jagged slashes, as if someone had traced my rune on the window with a finger of night. I stumbled out of bed and flung the shutters open. Nothing, only the orchard, silvered by moonlight, leaves rustling softly. But when I lifted my hand to my brow, the rune flared, bright enough to cast a faint glow on my fingertips. I knew then, with a certainty that made my stomach drop, that Aaron had been right. Something had noticed me, and it was already searching for the door. Before dawn, I made my choice. If the moon court would not welcome a cursed villager, then I would go anyway, because if I stayed, I would become reachable in ways that would ruin not just me, but anyone I loved. I wrapped a scarf around my brow until only my eyes showed. I packed bread, a small vial of silver water, and my father's old traveling cloak. My mother tried to stop me twice, tears shining in her lashes, but in the end, she kissed my forehead right beside the rune, as if daring it to hurt her. "Go fast," she whispered. "Go to the prince. Do not sleep alone. Do not follow voices that call you sweet names." I promised her I wouldn't. I didn't tell her the truth, that the voice had never called me sweet. It had called me mine. If you're enjoying this story so far, pause for a second and comment where you're listening from, and make sure you subscribe to the channel. I didn't take the road. The road belonged to traders and patrols, to people with questions and lanterns, and the authority to stop a girl with a scarf, wrapped too tight around her brow. I slipped instead through the narrow deer paths that braided the silver grove, moving beneath branches that knew my footsteps, and tried to comfort me with the soft creak of old wood. But comfort was a thin thing, when every shadow looked deeper than it should. By mid-morning, the rune began to itch. At first it was just a faint prickle beneath the cloth, like the beginning of a rash. Then it became a hot, insistent pulse that matched the rhythm of my walking. I pressed my fingers against it through the scarf, willing it to calm, and the itch turned into a low ache that spread behind my eyes. "Reachable," Aaron had said. I tried not to think about what that meant. I tried to keep my mind on practical things. The direction of the river, the sun's angle, the distance to the moon court. I had been there once, years ago, when a festival allowed common folk to stand in the outer gardens and watch the nobles glide past like living starlight. The moon court sat beyond the riverlands, built into white cliffs that caught moonlight even at noon. Its gates were carved from a single piece of pale stone veined with silver. The place in my memory was bright and unreachable, like a song you can hear but never sing. Now I was walking toward it with a nightmare on my skin. I reached the river at noon. It was wider than I remembered, swollen with winter melt, moving fast and loud over dark stones. Mist rose from it in thin, twisting ribbons. The crossing point was a fallen tree that bridged the water, its trunk slick with moss. I stepped onto it and immediately regretted it. The world tilted. Water roared below. I steadied myself with my arms out, taking small steps. Halfway across, the rune flared. A sudden heat flashed through my forehead, sharp as a pin, driven into bone. My vision blurred, and the mist above the river thickened, curling into shapes. I stopped, heart pounding. In the mist, something tall unfolded, as if the fog had remembered how to be a body. Bone-white branches formed a rib cage, Glassy shadows made a face without eyes, and in the center of that faceless head, the same symbol burned. The nightmare creature was not supposed to exist in daylight, yet it was there, standing on the water as if the river were stone. Come. The feeling pressed into me. Not a voice. A pull. My foot slid forward on the log without my permission. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. No, 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 no. I dug my nails into the bark until sap slicked my fingertips. The pain helped. I forced my body to crouch, to lower its center of gravity. I stared at the creature and tried to hate it, tried to fill my chest with fury instead of fear. The creature tilted its head. The rune on my brow pulsed, bright beneath my scarf. Mine. The word hit me like a shove, and for one terrible heartbeat I wanted to step off the log and walk to it, wanted to sink into the mist and let it carry me where it pleased. A shout snapped through the air. Hold! It wasn't the nightmare's command. It was sharp and real, and echoed off the trees. Something struck the log near my hand, a silver arrow, embedded deep, vibrating from the force. I jerked back as if it had nearly hit me. The mist creature recoiled, its form rippling. Another arrow hissed through the air and tore straight through the creature's chest. The fog exploded, scattering into the wind like breath. I sucked in air, dizzy, and looked toward the riverbank. 3 figures stood among the trees, cloaked in dark green. Elves, but not villagers. Their posture was too precise, their movements too controlled. Mooncourt scouts. One of them lowered his bow slowly, eyes fixed on me. Even from this distance I could feel the weight of his suspicion. "Stay where you are," he called. "Show your hands." My throat was dry. I lifted my hands, palms out, trying to keep them from shaking. The second scout stepped forward, hood falling back to reveal a narrow, stern face and hair the color of ash. Her gaze flicked to my scarf, lingering on the place where the rune burned. "What are you doing on a border crossing alone?" she demanded. "And why are you covered like a thief?" I swallowed. I could lie. I could say I was sick, that I was ashamed of a scar, that I was running from a bad match. Lies were easy, but the rune throbbed hotter, as if it enjoyed the taste of deceit. I forced the truth out. "I'm going to the Mooncourt." The first scout's eyes narrowed. "For what? For help?" I said. "Because something marked me." The third scout, who had been silent, shifted his weight. He was taller than the others, his hood still shadowing his face. His voice came low and careful, like someone approaching a wounded animal. "Remove the scarf," he said. Cold rushed through my stomach. "I can't." "Remove it," he repeated, and this time there was authority in it, the kind that didn't ask twice. I thought of my mother's tears. I thought of Aaron's warning. I thought of the creature standing on the river like it owned the world. With trembling fingers, I unwound the scarf. The air hit my forehead like ice. The rune glowed openly, its light faint, but unmistakable in the noon sun. The scouts stiffened as if an invisible hand had shoved them back. The ash-haired scout swore under her breath. "Nightmare glyph." The first scout lifted his bow again, not quite pointing it at me, but close enough to make my skin crawl. "You shouldn't be here," he said flatly. "You should be quarantined. You should be..." His gaze flicked to the river, as if considering whether drowning a cursed girl would be a mercy. The tall scout stepped forward, and his hood fell back. I froze, because I knew that face, even though I had only ever seen it from a distance, framed by moonlit balconies and whispered rumors. High, fine cheekbones, eyes like pale storm glass, hair as dark as midnight, water, braided back with silver cords, and on his brow, a thin circlet of moonstone that marked him as more than a simple patrol leader, Prince Kalian of the Mooncourt. My knees threatened to fold. He stared at the rune on my forehead, with an intensity that made me feel like I was being read like a page. His expression did not twist with disgust the way I expected. Instead, something like recognition sparked behind his eyes, followed by a restrained, careful curiosity. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked quietly. In waking light, I licked my lips. "On the river," I whispered, "in the mist." His jaw tightened, as if that confirmed a fear he'd been carrying. The scouts beside him looked confused, glancing between us. The ash-haired scout leaned toward him. "My prince, this is dangerous. We should..." Kalian lifted a hand without looking away from me. Silence fell like a curtain. He stepped, closer to the edge of the river, studying the log, the rushing water, the place where the mist creature had stood. Then he looked back at me. "What is your name?" "Leora," I said, voice barely there. "Leora of the Silver Grove," he repeated, tasting it like he was matching it to something he already knew. "How long since the mark appeared?" "Since last night." His gaze sharpened. "And the dreams?" I hesitated. "Every night now," I admitted. "It calls me." Kalian's eyes flicked briefly to his scouts, then back. He made a decision so quickly I almost didn't see it happen. "You will come with us," he said. The first scout's head snapped toward him. "My prince," Kalian's voice cut like clean steel. "She will come with us." He stepped onto the log without hesitation, balancing easily, moving toward me as if the roaring river beneath him was nothing. Halfway across, he stopped close enough that I could see the faint silver scars on his hands, old magic burns. He reached out slowly, palm up, inviting rather than taking. I didn't know why, but my breath hitched. The rune flared, bright as a star. His gaze dropped to it, and something in his face softened with a sadness that startled me. "They call it a nightmare rune," he murmured. "A stain, a curse." I swallowed hard, shame burning hotter than fear. "Isn't it?" Kalian lifted his eyes to mine. "No," he said, "not always." Then so quietly only I could hear over the river, he added the words that turned my blood cold and bright at the same time. "In the oldest tongue of our court, that mark is not named as a curse. It is named as a crown." And before I could ask what that meant, the rune pulsed again, and the world seemed to tilt toward him, as if whatever lived between dreams had suddenly noticed that I was no longer alone. Kalian's hand was steady. I expected it to feel cold, like moonstone. Instead, his skin was warm from movement, calloused in places that spoke of training rather than silk. The moment my fingers touched his palm, the rune on my brow surged with heat so sharp I gasped. The scouts reacted instantly. One stepped forward with a blade half drawn. The ash-haired one hissed a warning under her breath. Kalian didn't flinch. His eyes narrowed slightly, not at me, but at the glow blooming beneath my skin as if the mark were waking up for him. "Easy," he murmured, as though speaking to a startled animal. The heat settled into a pulse that matched his heartbeat through our joined hands. That was the strangest part. The rune wasn't only tied to mine, it listened to him. I forced myself to breathe. The river roared below us, the log slick under my boots, and I was suddenly acutely aware that I was balanced between two worlds, the village I had fled, and the court I had no right to enter. Kalian guided me across the last few steps, his grip firm when my foot slipped. When we reached the bank, he didn't let go immediately. He watched my face as if reading for a change. The rune brightened once, then dimmed. Only then did he release me. The scouts formed a cautious half-circle. None came within arm's length. Their fear was not theatrical. It had the clean, practical edge of people who had seen something go wrong and survived it. The first scout spoke, voice tight. "My prince, we should bind her, or at least veil the mark." Kalian turned his head slightly, gaze still on me. "She is already bound," he said. My stomach dropped. Bound to what? His eyes met mine. "Not to us," he said, as if answering the thought. "That's the problem." He nodded once toward the trees. "We move. Here, the border is thin. The river keeps memories." The ash-haired scout scoffed softly, but she obeyed. They led us along a narrow trail that climbed away from the water, winding through pines so dense the daylight turned green and dim. I kept my scarf in my hands, unsure whether to hide the rune again or let it breathe. Every time I lifted the cloth toward my brow, the mark prickled, almost irritated, like it disliked being covered. After a quarter hour, we reached a small encampment hidden in a rocky hollow. Wards had been hung from branches, strings of pale beads, knots of silver thread, and small crescent charms that clicked softly in the wind. The air inside the hollow felt different, like stepping under an awning during rain. The pressure behind my eyes eased slightly. The scouts relaxed a fraction. Kalian gestured toward a flat stone near the center. "Sit, you're shaking." I hadn't realized I was. My knees felt hollow, my limbs both heavy and too light, as if the dream was still clinging to me in thin strands. I sat, keeping my hands folded tightly in my lap. The ash-haired scout crouched a few paces away and began to draw a circle in the dirt with powdered salt that glittered faintly. Moon salt, I recognized, used to seal small household charms. Here it looked like a boundary line for something much worse. Kalian watched her work, then looked back at me. "You said it calls you. Does it speak in words?" "No," I said. "It's more like the world leaning in one direction, like my body wants to obey before my mind can argue." He nodded once, grim. "And the mark appeared after a single dream?" I hesitated. It was my first time seeing it, I admitted. "But the nightmares, they've been circling me for weeks. I thought they were just stress, shadows, bad sleep." Kalian's mouth tightened. "The dream. Plague has been circling us for months." One of the scouts, the first one, muttered, "Months. Try years." Kalian silenced him with a glance. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Leora, listen carefully. There are things our elders don't like to say out loud. The court's power has always rested on clear boundaries, between forest and stone, between life and death, between waking and dream. Those boundaries are fraying. Something is pressing from the other side, testing for weakness." I swallowed, the rune warming as if it approved of being acknowledged. Kalian's gaze flicked to my brow. "That mark is a key, or a lock. We haven't yet proven which." My stomach twisted. Everyone in my village would have called it a curse. "You called it a crown." A flicker of something crossed his face, too quick to name. Pain, perhaps. Or memory. In the oldest records there is a title, he said. The Knight. Crown. It was not worn by royalty. It was borne by someone who could walk the edge without falling through. I let out a shaky breath. That sounds like a story mothers tell children to scare them into sleeping. It was a story, Kalian said softly, until people began waking with blood on their tongues, until patrols started finding travelers wandering into ravines with blank smiles, until the court's own seers began screaming in their sleep. The air in the hollow seemed to grow colder. The ash-haired scout finished the circle and tossed a pinch of moon salt into the center. It flared in a pale shimmer, then sank into the earth as if swallowed. She looked up at Kalian. Ready. Kalian extended his hand toward me again. Step into the circle. My instincts screamed not to. Something about boundaries always felt like traps, but the hollow outside the circle suddenly felt too open, too exposed. I stood and stepped over the line. The moment my boot crossed it, the rune flared violently. Light raced along the skin of my brow, then slid downward, branching in thin lines like frost creeping over glass. For an instant, I saw the rune's shape expand into something else. Arcs, points, a pattern that felt like a crown forming from a wound. I gasped and clapped a hand over my forehead. The scouts recoiled, but Kalian didn't step back, his eyes fixed on the glow with an intensity that made my skin prickle. The ash-haired scout whispered, horrified, "It's responding to the wards." "No," Kalian said, voice very quiet. "It's recognizing them, recognizing, as if it had seen moonsalt before, as if it belonged in places where moonsalt was used." The light dimmed again, leaving my skin hot and sore. I lowered my hand, breathing hard. Kalian's gaze stayed on me. Not fear, not disgust. Something closer to awe. "Tell me about your dream," he said. "The moment it marked you. What did it do?" I forced myself to recount it. The black snow, the bone trees, the faceless mouth, the pressure of the finger on my brow. When I said the word mine out loud, my throat tightened as if that sound itself carried danger. Kalian's jaw clenched. "That's not a random nightmare. That's a claim." "A claim," I echoed, dread pooling in my stomach, like ownership. He didn't deny it. The first scout shifted, angry. "My prince, this is exactly why we should end it here. Bring her to the court, and you bring the plague to our gates." Kalian's eyes flashed, sudden and cold. "We already have the plague. We've been bleeding in the dark while pretending we're clean." The scout stiffened, then looked away. Kalian turned back to me, voice softer, but edged with urgency. "You said it appeared last night. That means the thing on the other side has chosen to move faster. It will try again. Soon." My mouth went dry. How soon? Kalian didn't answer with a number. He reached into his cloak and pulled out a thin cord braided from pale silver thread. It looked delicate, but when he held it up, it hummed faintly, like a plucked harp string. "This is a tether," he said, "a moon court binding. It's meant to anchor a mind during dream walks, so it doesn't drift too far." My pulse spiked. "Dream walks?" Kalian's gaze held mine. "I need to know whether your mark can be turned, whether it can be made to serve a boundary instead of breaking it." I shook my head slightly, panic rising. "I didn't ask for this. I don't want to be a boundary. I don't want to be anything." His expression softened, just a fraction. "I know, but wanting has little power once something like that has placed its hand on you." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so the scouts couldn't hear. "If we do nothing, it will keep pulling. One night you won't wake in time, and then it won't just have you. It will have a door." My breath hitched. Kalian lifted the silver cord. "The tether requires 2 points, one to drift and one to hold." My stomach turned. "You want me to sleep while you watch me?" "Not watch," he said, and for the first time there was something strangely gentle in his tone. "Hold." He offered the cord across his palm. "If you agree, we bind your wrist to mine. If the dream pulls, I pull back. If it tries to take you, it has to get through me first." The scouts were still arguing in low voices at the edge of the hollow, their words blurred by the hush of wards. Kalian stood in front of me like a wall between me and the river mist. I stared at the cord. Trusting a prince felt foolish. Trusting anyone felt dangerous. But the rune pulsed again, slow and hungry, and I felt the faint tilt of the world toward sleep, even though the sun was still high. It was coming, whether I agreed or not. I swallowed, voice unsteady. "What happens if it gets through you?" Kalian's eyes didn't waver. "Then you'll see what kind of crown this really is." He lifted his wrist and bared the skin beneath his glove. There, faint but unmistakable, was an old scar in the shape of a crescent split by jagged lines, not glowing, not fresh, but the same pattern. My heart lurched. Kalian saw my expression and exhaled, as if surrendering a secret he'd carried too long. "It marked me first. he said. Years ago, I survived by binding it into silence. His gaze dropped to my forehead, where the rune pulsed like a living ember. But yours didn't come to sleep. Yours came to wake. Kalian's scar made the hollow feel smaller. I stared at it as if staring could turn it into something harmless, like a childhood scrape. But the shape was too exact, too deliberate. The crescent, the 3 jagged slashes, a twin to my burning mark, only faded into pale tissue and old pain. The ash-haired scout stepped closer, eyes narrowing. My prince, you never said it was the same. Kalian flexed his wrist and pulled his glove back up with a calm that felt practiced. I did not say because it would have changed. Nothing, he replied. You would still fear it, and fear makes people stupid. She bristled but fell silent. My throat tightened. You lived with that? I asked him. All this time, his gaze met mine, steady as stone. I lived despite it. There is a difference. The rune on my brow pulsed in a slow, insistent rhythm, as if it enjoyed our conversation. Heat crept along my skin, and my thoughts began to feel slightly distant, like they were drifting a step. Behind my eyes, Kalian noticed immediately. His posture changed, alert. It is near, he said. The scouts shifted, hands going to weapons. But Kalian lifted the silver tether again, and looked only at me. This is not about bravery, Leora, he said quietly. It is about choosing the least terrible path. I wanted to laugh at that. Least terrible. As if any path that involved sleeping with a nightmare rune on my forehead could be measured in comfort. But the pull was growing. The world was tilting toward that edge place. I could feel it in the way sound softened, in the way the ward beads chimed too slowly. I held out my hand. Kalian looped one end of the tether around my wrist with careful precision, not too tight, not too loose. When he tied the knot, the silver thread warmed, humming like a living thing. Then he wrapped the other end around his own wrist. The moment the tether connected, us, the rune flared bright. For a heartbeat, I thought it would burn a hole through my skull. I gasped and bent forward, gripping my knees. Kalian caught my shoulder, steadying me. Breathe. Stay with me. His voice was not the distant voice of a prince on a balcony. It was close, grounded, the voice of someone who had stood in dark places and learned how to speak people back from the edge. I drew in air, shakily, and the pain eased into a hard pulse. The ash-haired scout drew a small vial from her belt and uncorked it. Moondraft, she said to me, still mistrustful but no longer arguing. It will keep your heart steady. If you start to thrash, we will cut the tether. Understood? Cut it. The words landed like ice. My stomach twisted, but I nodded. Understood. Kalian's gaze sharpened at the scout, warning flickering in his eyes, but he did not contradict her. He only guided me down onto a bedroll laid inside the salt circle. Lie back, he said. Keep your eyes on me until you cannot. I obeyed, because my body was already halfway to sleep. The ward beads chimed softly. The pines above the hollow sighed. Kalian lowered himself beside me, close enough that I could see the faint lines of exhaustion beneath his eyes. You have done this before, I whispered. He hesitated, then nodded. Once. I swore never again. Why did you break that vow? His eyes met mine. Because you came to the border alone with a mark that wakes in daylight, and because if you fall, the court falls after you. His honesty was not comforting. It was heavier than comfort. The moondraft touched my lips. It tasted like cold flowers and metal. I swallowed, and the world blurred at the edges. Kalian's hand closed around mine. Not romantic, not possessive, anchoring. Do not follow voices, he murmured. Do not accept gifts. Do not speak your true name if anything asks for it. My mouth felt thick. What if it already knows? Kalian's thumb pressed once against my knuckles, a small pulse of reassurance. Then we find out how it learned. Sleep took me like a wave. One blink, and the hollow was gone. Black snow stretched under a sky without stars. Bone trees glittered, branches chiming with each breath of wind. The cold here was not natural cold. It was the cold of being watched. My rune burned bright, and I felt the tether between Kalian and me as a thin silver line in the air, trailing from my wrist into the darkness behind me like a thread leading home. I turned slowly. Kalian stood a few steps away, his cloak moving in a wind I could not feel on my skin. His eyes were brighter here, stormglass lit from within. The faded scar on his wrist glimmered faintly, answering my glow. So it is true, I whispered. You can come in. His gaze swept the nightmare forest, calculating. I can come just far enough to pull you back. The bone branches chimed louder, as if offended. Something moved beyond the tree line. The ground trembled. The darkness between the trees thickened, gathering itself into shape. My lungs tightened. It was closer than before. It did not bother with slow approach now. It knew the path. It knew me. The faceless creature stepped into view, and the rune on its forehead pulsed in perfect time with mine. Its presence pressed against my mind like a hand. Mine. The feeling came. Kalian stepped forward instantly, placing himself half between me and the creature. His voice cut through the pressure. No. The creature tilted its head, as if amused. The air around it rippled, and suddenly the bone trees around us were not trees at all, but the suggestion of ribs, a vast cage. I realized with a sick jolt that the entire forest might be part of its body. A door walks with you, Kalian, the feeling pressed. Not words, but meaning. You dragged a door into my hall. Kalian's jaw clenched. This is not your hall. The creature lifted one long finger and pointed at my forehead. The crown returns. My stomach lurched. Crown. It said it like a title. I backed up without meaning to, snow crunching under my boots. The tether line shimmered. Kalian glanced at it, then at my wrist. Hold, he commanded, voice sharp. Do not drift. The pressure increased. The world leaned. My feet wanted to step toward the creature again. The rune burned hotter, and something in me answered, eager and terrified. I fought it, teeth clenched, but the pull was stronger in this place. It tugged at my thoughts, at my memories, sorting through them like a hand through spilled pearls. I felt my mother's kitchen, the smell of bread. I felt the river mist. I felt my name on the edge of my tongue. Kalian moved faster than I expected. He grabbed my wrist and yanked the tether line tight, drawing me back a step. Pain lanced up my arm, real even in the dream. The creature's faceless head tilted again. It did not attack. It watched, patient, as if it had all the time in the world. Then the darkness behind it opened like a mouth. Not the creature's mouth, the space itself. A seam tore through the air, revealing something deeper than night, a void threaded with pale runes that crawled like living insects. From that seam came a sound that was not a sound, a vibration that made my bones ache. Kalian's face went taut with recognition. It is opening, he breathed. It is trying to bring you through. Through where? I forced out. Kalian did not answer with words. He only pulled again, anchoring me, bracing his feet in the black snow. The seam widened, and from inside it, something reached toward my forehead. Not a hand, not a claw, but a crown-shaped shadow, perfectly fitted to the rune on my skin. The moment it touched the air near me, my rune flared so bright, it turned the black snow silver, and I heard, for the first time, an actual voice, not the creature's, my own. It whispered from somewhere behind my eyes, "Put it on, put it on." The words didn't come from the faceless creature. They came from inside me, wearing my own voice like a borrowed cloak. The sound slid along my thoughts with the ease of someone who already knew every door in my mind. My hands rose before I decided to move, fingers reaching toward the crown-shaped shadow hovering in the air. Kalian caught my wrist. His grip was iron. "No," he said, teeth clenched. "Do not accept anything it offers." But it wasn't offering. It was fitting. The shadow crown drifted closer, drawn as surely as a tide to my rune. The crescent and the jagged slashes on my brow flared, not in warning, but in recognition. Heat spread through my skull, and for a moment the nightmare forest sharpened into brutal clarity, each bone branch etched with tiny runes, each flake of black snow shaped like a splintered star. The seam in the air widened again, and the void behind, it breathed. I felt it inhale me. My thoughts began to loosen, unraveling like thread. Memories spilled at the edges. My mother's hands dusted with flour. The orchard at moonrise. The first time I heard the court's distant music from beyond our hills, and thought it was the sound of a different life. "Put it on," my voice whispered again, softer now, coaxing. "If you wear it, it stops hurting. If you wear it, you won't be afraid." Kalian's eyes flashed, storm glass hard. "That is not you speaking, Leora." I tried to answer, but my tongue felt heavy, as if the air here wanted to keep words from forming. The pull toward the seam increased. My feet slid forward in the black snow, inch by inch, no matter how I braced. The faceless creature watched without moving, patient as a waiting grave. Kalian planted himself, yanked the tether line taut, and dragged me back half a step. The silver thread between our wrists vibrated with strain. His face tightened with pain, but he didn't release me. In that instant, I understood what he meant about holding. He wasn't simply watching me drown. He was tying himself to the drowning. The crown shadow brushed my forehead. I cried out. The contact was cold and scorching at once, like plunging my head into winter fire. The rune flared so bright it cast pale light across Kalian's cheekbones. I saw his scar answer with a faint shimmer, as though something long asleep inside him had stirred. The seam in the air reacted, widening like an eye, and suddenly the faceless creature moved. It stepped closer in a slow glide, its enormous presence pressing down on the snow. The bone trees chimed wildly, as if they were laughing. "Mine," the feeling said. But this time it wasn't a shove. It was certainty. A legal claim written in blood and dream. Kalian pulled me closer to him until my shoulder hit his chest. His voice dropped low, urgent, meant for only my ears. Listen to me. It wants you to wear the crown because the crown is authority in this place. If you accept it the wrong way, you become its bride, its vessel, its door. My stomach heaved. Bride, vessel, door. Then what do? I managed. Voice thin. Kalian's eyes held mine. You take it on your terms. You do not kneel. You do not beg. You do not accept its name for you. A bitter laugh rose in my throat. How do I take anything on my terms in a nightmare? Kalian's expression didn't soften. By remembering you are not helpless. The crown shadow pressed closer, trying to settle over the rune like a helm, finding the shape of a skull. My vision blurred. The black snow beneath us began to melt into something else, a slick surface that looked like dark glass. The forest's edges wavered, as if we were falling through layers of sleep. And inside my mind, the whisper changed. Put it on, it crooned. Put it on, and you will finally be chosen. It hit where I was weakest. My village had always been kind, but kindness isn't the same as being seen. I was the girl who wove well, who smiled politely, who never caused trouble. The one people praised for being steady, which is another way of saying forgettable. Chosen. My throat tightened with a sudden humiliating ache. The crown shadow seemed to sense it, pressing with gentle insistence. Kalian's hand tightened around mine, and his voice cut through the sweetness like a blade. It is lying to you. It does not choose. It consumes. The faceless creature lifted its long finger again and traced a slow arc in the air, like a coronation gesture. The seam opened wider. A wind poured through, smelling of iron and wet stone, and the black snow lifted in spirals. The crown shadow began to solidify, turning from smoke into something with edges, points, weight. I felt the first touch of it against my hairline, and the rune on my brow screamed with light. In the waking world, I heard something faint and distant, like voices underwater, shouts, the chime of ward beads, the sound of someone calling Kalian's name, the scouts. Part of me clung to that sound like a rope. I forced my eyes shut and did the one thing I could still control. I remembered my mother's hands on my face that morning, the way she kissed the skin beside the mark, as if daring it to hurt her. Go fast, she had whispered. Do not sleep alone. I wasn't alone. Kalian was here, tied to me, bleeding strength into the tether. I opened my eyes and stared at the faceless creature. If this crown is mine, I said, voice shaking but louder than before, then I wear it to close your mouth. The words tasted strange in the air, like a vow spoken into water. For a heartbeat, everything stilled. The bone trees stopped chiming. The crown shadow paused, hovering half-formed above my brow. Kalian's eyes widened slightly, a flash of surprise and something like fierce approval. The faceless creature leaned forward, and the pressure of its presence became almost intimate, like breath against skin. Then, for the first time, it answered in something that felt like laughter. You think you can command what marked you? The seam pulsed, and the crown shadow slammed down onto my rune. Pain exploded behind my eyes, blinding white. I screamed, and the world fractured like glass. In the shattering, I felt something else awaken inside me, deep and ancient, as if the rune wasn't only a brand, but a sleeping muscle finally flexing. The nightmare forest vanished. I stood instead on a vast, dark sea under a starless sky, the surface perfectly still. In the distance rose a throne carved from shadow and bone, and above it hung a crescent of broken light. A crown sat on my head now, not metal, not stone, but living darkness edged with silver. And across the black sea, the faceless creature watched me with a patience that suddenly felt like hunger. Mine, it said again. But this time, my own voice answered from behind my teeth, steady and cold. No. And the sea beneath my feet began to ripple, as if it recognized me too. The sea recognized me. That should have comforted me. Instead, it terrified me, because recognition is a kind of relationship, and I had never wanted a relationship with the place between dreams. The black water beneath my boots rippled outward in perfect rings, as if my pulse had become a stone dropped into its surface. The crown on my head felt weightless and heavy at the same time, like a thought that could crush a skull if you held it too tightly. Its edges were made of darkness, but the rim glimmered with a thin silver line that reminded me of moonlight on a knife. Across the water, the faceless creature watched, not moving, not rushing, waiting. It did not need to hurry. It believed I would eventually tire, and in this place, tiring was a kind of death. I swallowed hard and lifted my hand. The motion felt different here. In the waking world, my hand was muscle and bone. Here it was intention. The air obeyed it like water obeys a paddle. The sea stilled under my palm. A low sound vibrated through the black glass, like a distant gong. I felt it in my teeth. "Kalian," I whispered. The tether on my wrist was still there, a line of silver light stretching behind me into the darkness where the nightmare forest had been. I could feel him at the other end, not as a body but as a pressure, a stubborn anchor holding against a current. I pulled. The silver line tightened, and the water behind me buckled. A shape rose from it, breaking the surface without splashing. Kalian stepped onto the sea, as if he had climbed out of a reflection, cloak dripping darkness instead of water. His eyes snapped to my head. For a heartbeat, I saw true fear in him. "The crown," he said. I touched it instinctively, as if it might have appeared without my permission. It forced itself on me. Kalian's jaw tightened. "And you said no?" I nodded once, throat tight. I said no, but it's still on me. His gaze flicked toward the faceless creature across the sea. It did not move, but the air around it pulsed as if it were breathing. Kalian stepped closer, lowering his voice. "If it ceded the crown on you, then it believes the crown belongs to it, and that you are only borrowing it. It will try to make you prove otherwise." "How?" I asked. Kalian's eyes sharpened. "By offering you what you think you want, until you take it and call it yours. In this place, desire is a leash." As if hearing him, the sea in front of us shimmered. The black surface softened, turning translucent. A scene rose from it like a picture blooming in ink. My mother's kitchen. Warm firelight. The smell of bread and crushed herbs. My mother stood at the table with flour on her hands, smiling as if nothing had happened, as if I had never left, as if there had never been a Rune. My chest ached so suddenly I almost staggered. "Come home," my mother said gently, her voice sweet and normal. "You don't have to be afraid. We'll cover it. We'll tell them you fell and scarred yourself. We'll keep you safe." Kalian caught my elbow. "That is not her." But the image was perfect. Even the small crease at the corner of her mouth when she tried not to worry. Even the way she tucked hair behind her ear when she thought. My throat tightened. I took a step forward. The crown warmed, as if pleased. The scene shifted. The kitchen door opened and villagers stepped in, laughing, carrying baskets. Someone called my name as if I were cherished, as if I were important. "Chosen," the whisper inside me murmured. "Seen." I could feel myself leaning toward it, not because I believed the illusion completely, but because my heart was so hungry for the relief of being done, of being safe, of being ordinary again. Kalian's hand tightened on my arm, painful. "Look at the edges," he snapped. I forced myself to focus beyond my mother's face, beyond the laughter. The firelight in the illusion did not flicker. The shadows did not move naturally. The corners of the room were too still, like painted darkness. The villagers' smiles were just a fraction too wide. And my mother's eyes, when she looked at my forehead, held a glint that was not love. It was ownership. Mine, the pressure came again, sliding beneath the illusion like a blade under cloth. I jerked back, breath ragged, and the kitchen scene shattered into black ripples. The faceless creature tilted its head, as if amused by my disappointment. "You are clever," Kalian said under his breath. "But even clever crowns slip." I clenched my hands into fists. "Then tell me how to make it stop." Kalian's gaze locked on the crown. "The old records say the night crown was never meant to be worn for comfort. It is worn for work. It is a burden that turns nightmares back on themselves. But it demands something in exchange." My stomach dropped. "What?" He hesitated. "A price. Memory. Feeling. Time. Something precious. Enough that it marks you even when you wake." The crown seemed to pulse, as if listening. Across the sea, the faceless creature lifted one finger again, not pointing now, but beckoning, as though inviting me to name the price myself. I felt a sudden tug behind my eyes, a pull toward a memory so bright it hurt. A summer night when I was small, curled against my mother's side, listening to her sing while fireflies drifted like living stars. The warmth of that moment flooded my chest. The crown warmed hungrily. It wanted that. I went cold. It doesn't just want my body. It wants my life. Kalian's expression hardened. Grim agreement. That is how it wins. It cannot take you all at once. So it takes you in pieces until there is nothing left but a door. The sea around my boots rippled again, and another image rose up. Faster, sharper, crueler. My village at night. The orchard twisted into bone branches. Black snow fell. People ran with blank faces, stumbling like sleepwalkers. My mother stood at the center of it all, reaching toward me, mouth open in a scream I couldn't hear. Then the faceless creature appeared behind her, looming, and it pressed its finger to her forehead. The rune flared on her skin. My own voice screamed inside my head. "No, I lunged forward. Kalian grabbed me, bracing, pulling me back with the tether, but I was already halfway gone, rage and terror flooding me with strength I didn't know I had. The crown on my head blazed. The sea responded. A wave rose from the black surface, not water but darkness shaped into force, surging toward the image. It slammed into the illusion of my village like a fist through glass. The scene shattered, exploding into shards of light that dissolved into the air. Silence fell, heavy, waiting. I stood trembling, breath ripping in and out of my lungs. Kalian stared at me like he was seeing a weapon being forged in real time. "You can strike it," he said quietly. "I didn't choose to," I snapped, voice breaking. "It showed me my mother." Kalian's expression softened for one heartbeat. "That is why it chose you. Not because you are weak, because you love. Love makes a doorway, but it also makes a wall, if you use it correctly." The faceless creature leaned forward, and, for the first time, the pressure of it felt angry. The black sea beneath us began to churn. The surface warped, forming a spiral that pulled inward toward a point in the distance where the shadow throne waited. The crown on my head pulled with it, as if something there was calling it home. Kalian grabbed my wrist, eyes fierce. "It's trying to drag you to the throne. If you sit there, you become its ruler in name and its prisoner in truth." Swallowed, staring at the distant throne that seemed closer now, as if the sea itself were moving us toward it. "Then what do?" I whispered. Kalian's voice dropped, urgent and raw. "You do what a crown is supposed to do. You claim authority without surrender. You command the boundary." I stared at the churning sea, at the spiral tightening like a noose. My rune burned, my head aching with the weight of the crown, and somewhere far away I heard the faint chime of ward beads and the muffled sound of shouting, as if the waking world was panicking. If the scouts cut the tether, I would be alone here, and alone here meant lost. I lifted my chin toward the faceless creature, heart hammering. "You said I was yours," I said, voice shaking but clear. "If that were true, you wouldn't need to drag me." The pressure hit back like a slap. The spiral tightened. Kalian braced beside me, pulling against. "The tether with all his strength. Leora now," he growled. "Command it." I closed my eyes for one heartbeat and thought of my mother's kiss beside the mark. Not fear, defiance. When I opened my eyes, I raised my hand over the sea and spoke the only truth I trusted. "I am not your door." The crown flared, and the black water beneath my palm froze into a smooth, shining surface like obsidian. The spiral stuttered. For the first time, the faceless creature recoiled, and in that recoil, I felt something new beneath its hunger. Recognition, not of ownership, of threat. Then the sea split open between us with a crack like thunder, and the darkness below surged upward, reaching for Kalian's wrist, reaching for the old scar there, as if it had found a second handle to pull. Kalian's face twisted in sudden pain, and the tether between us snapped tight enough to burn. The darkness found Kalian's scar like a hand finding a familiar latch. It rose from the split sea in a column that wasn't water or smoke, but something thicker, like the absence of light given shape. It wrapped around his wrist with slow certainty, and the faded crescent on his skin flared as if it had been waiting to be touched again. Kalian's face twisted. He made a sound that didn't belong in a prince's mouth, raw and startled, and his knees buckled a fraction. Before he forced them straight, the tether between us burned hot, vibrating like a string pulled too tight. I felt it through my bones, not just his pain, his memory. A flash of stone corridors lit by cold moonfire, a circle of robed elders, Kalian younger, breathing hard, his wrist bleeding into a bowl of silver salt, a voice saying, "Bind it into silence, or it will bind you into a throne." Then the memory snapped away, yanked like a ribbon from my grasp, and I was back on the black sea with the crown biting into my skull. Kalian's eyes met mine, wide with warning. "Do not let it take my wrist," he gritted out. "If it hooks into the old mark, it can pull us both through the seam, through the throne, through whatever waited beyond." The faceless creature across the sea leaned forward, almost pleased. The pressure of it brushed my thoughts like fingers turning pages. 2 crowns, it seemed to hum, one new, one buried, both mine. The darkness tightened around Kalian's wrist. His breath hitched, the silver tether flared, and for an instant I thought it would snap. If it did, I would be alone here. If it didn't, it might drag us both to the shadow throne like hooked fish. My instinct screamed to cut the line. The ash-haired scout's voice echoed faintly from somewhere far away, as if from the bottom of a lake. "If you start to thrash, we will cut the tether. They might cut it for me." Panic surged, sharp and useless, and the crown warmed hungrily as if feeding on it. I tasted iron, the same taste I'd had when the nightmare first marked me. No, I wasn't a door. I wasn't a meal. I lifted my hand over the darkness, gripping Kalian, and forced my voice to steady, as if steadiness were a spell. Release him. Nothing happened. The darkness didn't even pause. It only tightened. Again. And Kalian's scar blazed brighter, the crescent and jagged slashes burning as if freshly carved. Kalian sucked in air. Leora, he rasped. You can't command it like a soldier. It doesn't obey orders. It obeys names. Names. Of course, this place wasn't built on strength. It was built on meaning. I stared at the faceless creature. It watched me with a patience that felt ancient. It wanted me to guess wrong. It wanted me to try every desperate thing until I offered it what it wanted in the form of a plea. The crown on my head pulsed, and I understood something with sudden clarity that made my skin go cold. The crown wasn't just power. It was a language, a grammar of boundaries. I closed my eyes and searched for the feeling of the rune when it first flared under my mother's kiss. Not fear, defiance, a refusal to be claimed. When I opened my eyes, I didn't speak to them. Darkness. I spoke to the sea. Remember moonlight? I whispered. The black surface beneath us shivered. A sheen spread across it, thin as frost, turning the water into a mirror that caught a light that didn't exist in the sky. And in that mirrored surface, I saw Kalian's wrist reflected, not scarred, but whole, unmarked. I reached toward the reflection and grabbed it as if it were real. My fingers closed on cold, clean air, and the crown flared. So bright it hurt. The reflected wrist in the mirror jerked toward me, and at the same time, the darkness around Kalian's real wrist loosened, startled, as if its grip had slipped on something suddenly smooth. Kalian gasped. I yanked again, pulling the reflected image toward me like a rope. The darkness recoiled, rippling. It tried to tighten again, but the mirror sheen on the sea spread up Kalian's arm like silver varnish, making the old scar harder for the darkness to cling to. The faceless creature's pressure spiked, sharp with anger. The bone and shadow thrown in the distance pulsed, and the entire horizon seemed to tilt, as if the hall itself was shifting to keep its prey centered. Kalian staggered closer to me, his free hand bracing on my shoulder. His voice came through clenched teeth. Good. Keep pulling. Don't let it remember the scar. Don't let it remember, as if the scar were not only a mark, but a story. A story the darkness had written once and wanted to read again. The mirror sheen trembled under my feet. The sea fought back, resisting my command. The crown's edges dug into my thoughts, demanding payment for every inch of control. A memory surfaced uninvited, bright and tender. My mother's song on that summer night. Fireflies drifting like stars. The crown warmed, hungry. I flinched and shoved the memory down. Hard, almost viciously. Not that. Not her. Kalian's eyes flicked to my face, as if he felt the attempt. His voice softened for one heartbeat. Don't feed it what you love. Give it what you can lose. What could I lose? Pride, comfort, safety. The illusion that my life would be small and gentle. I swallowed, throat burning, and let that illusion go. The moment it broke, something inside me steadied. The crown's weight shifted from crushing to bracing, like armor settling onto shoulders. I pulled the reflection one last time. The darkness snapped away from Kalian's wrist with a soundless recoil, like a hand jerking from a hot stove. The split in the sea shuddered, trying to close. Kalian lurched forward, almost falling into me, and the tether between us sang with relief. For a single, fragile second, the black water stilled. Then the faceless creature did something I hadn't seen it do before. It spoke a name, not mine. Kalian's true name, spoken in a tone that made the air vibrate. Kalian froze as if struck. His eyes went wide, and the faded scar on his wrist flashed again, answering the sound like a bell answering a hammer. My stomach dropped, because I understood at once what that meant. The thing across the sea didn't just recognize his mark, it remembered him, and it hadn't been waiting for me alone. It had been waiting for us together. The moment it spoke the name beneath his name, Kalian went rigid. It wasn't like a spell that threw him backward. It was worse. It was like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting for it. His eyes lost focus. The storm glass went cloudy, as if someone had breathed fog over them from the inside. The silver tether between our wrists hummed and tightened, not from his strength this time, but from something else pulling on him with polite certainty. The black sea under our feet rippled, then dipped, forming a shallow slope toward the distant throne. The world tried to guide him the way a river guides a leaf. Kalian's mouth opened slightly, and I felt the horror of it like a knife. He was about to answer. The faceless creature didn't move, but the pressure of its presence wrapped around Kalian like invisible hands. It didn't need to shove him. It had named him. In this place, naming was grabbing. Kalian's lips shaped the first sound of that hidden name, and the old scar on his wrist flashed bright enough to sting my eyes. No, I said, but my voice sounded thin in the huge hush of the dream sea. The crown on my head pulsed once, heavy and expectant, as if reminding me that it was not decoration. It was a tool. Kalian had said it himself. It obeys names. So I did the only thing I could think to do. I reached for the name that was trying to rise out of him, not with my hand, but with the crown. In my mind, I pictured the word as a living thread pulled from his throat, bright and dangerous. I pictured it slipping toward the faceless creature like a ribbon offered at a wedding, and I pictured my crown like a hook of dark silver. "Hush," I whispered. The word felt childish, too small, but the crown didn't care about grandeur. It cared about intent. The air snapped. A ring of stillness spread around us, as if the sea had turned to glass. Kalian's lips froze mid-syllable. His throat bobbed once, trying to force the sound out, and failed. The pressure from the faceless creature slammed against the silence like a fist hitting a closed door. The sea trembled under the impact. My crown burned hotter, and pain lanced behind my eyes. The silence was not free. It demanded payment the way deep magic always did. Something inside my mind loosened. Not a thought, not a fear, a memory, bright and warm, lifted like a leaf caught in a strong wind. My mother's song, not the feeling of her arms around me, but the melody itself, the exact curve of it, the words that made it ours. The crown warmed hungrily. I panicked and tried to hold on, clawing at the memory like it was fabric slipping from my fingers. But the crown didn't ask. It took. The song tore away in a clean, devastating rip, and for an instant, I tasted ash. Kalian gasped like he'd been pulled from underwater. His eyes cleared, focusing sharply on mine. He looked at my face, and something in his expression shifted as if he knew exactly what I'd just paid. "Leora," he breathed, hoarse. "What did you give?" I couldn't answer. Not because I wouldn't. Because when I tried to summon the melody, there was nothing there. Just a blank space. Shaped like longing, the faceless creature leaned forward. The pressure against my mind was no longer amused. It was furious. "You would steal a name from my mouth." It pressed into the silence. And even though it couldn't break the hush fully, the meaning seeped through like cold through a wall. "You would gag my claim." My jaw clenched. I didn't steal anything. I thought back at it. I closed a door. The crown flared in agreement. But the flare hurt. It hurt worse than anything so far because now I understood what the crown would keep costing me, piece by piece, if I kept using it. The black sea buckled again, and the stillness ring cracked. Hairline fractures spread through it like ice splintering on a pond. Kalian grabbed my wrist, pulling me closer. "We can't stay," he said quickly. "It will keep trying different angles. If it can't take my name, it will take yours, or your memories, or the tether itself." I swallowed hard, throat burning. "Then wake me," I rasped. Kalian's eyes flicked to the silver line trailing behind us into darkness. "Not yet," he said. "If we break out too abruptly, it follows the snap. We need to leave clean." The faceless creature made a slow, deliberate motion, lifting its long finger again. Not toward Kalian this time, but toward my forehead. The crown. It wanted the crown back. The sea around our boots began to rise in thin pillars, each pillar forming a suggestion of a hand, a dozen reaching shapes emerging from the black surface. They weren't solid. They were intentions given form. They reached for my head. I stepped back instinctively, and the pillars followed, gliding over the sea like stalking reeds. Kalian's voice turned sharp, commanding. "Look at me, Leora. Not them." I forced my gaze to his face. His eyes were clear now, painfully present, and in them, I saw something I hadn't seen before in the earlier chaos. Not just a prince's duty, not just strategy, guilt, as if he had known this could happen and still led me into it. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to demand the truth, but the reaching hands were almost at my crown, fingertips of darkness hovering a breath away. Kalian squeezed my wrist hard enough to hurt, grounding me. "The crown responds to refusal," he said fast. "Not fear. Refuse again. Say it like law." I drew in a shaky breath. The blank space in my mind where my mother's song used to live throbbed like a wound. Anger rose in me, clean and fierce. Not at Kalian, not at the scouts, at the faceless thing that thought love made me easy. I lifted my chin toward the reaching pillars. "No," I said, voice rough but steady. "Not yours." The crown flashed, and the nearest pillar shattered into ripples. Another reached, another shattered. The sea churned, angry now, and the distant throne pulsed like a heartbeat. Kalian pulled me backward along the silver tether line. "Move," he ordered. Don't let it surround you. We ran across the black surface, boots striking glassy darkness. Behind us, the reaching hand surged higher, trying to overtake. The faceless creature remained at its distance, because it didn't need to chase. It sent the haul itself after us. The tether line brightened, pulling us toward the edge of the dream, toward the place where waking waited like a thin membrane. My lungs burned. My crown burned. The blank space in my mind burned worst of all. As we neared the edge, the faceless creature's pressure slammed forward one last time, a final attempt to hook me. It whispered in my voice again, softer, almost tender. Give it back, and I'll give you the song. My feet stuttered. For a heartbeat, the offer landed exactly where it was meant to. The empty place in me flared with longing so sharp it nearly broke my resolve. Kalian saw it on my face and didn't hesitate. He jerked the tether, yanking me into him, and pressed his forehead briefly against mine, right beside the rune, like an oath made physical. Do not bargain, he growled. It never gives. It only returns what it has already eaten, and it will take more for the privilege. The touch jolted me. Not romantic, electric, anchoring. I clung to that sensation, to the reality of him, and shoved the longing down. No bargain, I whispered. The tether line snapped bright, and the world tore open. I woke with a scream trapped in my throat. The hollow's green daylight hit my eyes like a slap. Ward beads chimed wildly above. My wrists burned where the silver tether was tied. Kalian was beside me, breathing hard, his face ashen. The scouts hovered at the edge of the salt circle, blades out, terror written plain on them. The first scout had his hand on a knife, poised to cut the tether. Kalian barked, "Don't!" The scout froze. I sat up too fast, dizzy, hand flying to my forehead. The rune was still there, still raised, but the glow had dimmed to a faint ember, and the crown. For a split second, I saw it reflected in the scout's widened eyes, a shadowed halo, with a thin silver rim hovering above my brow. Then it vanished, leaving only the rune and the pounding in my skull. I swallowed, trying to speak, trying to anchor myself with something familiar. A melody rose in my mind instinctively, and there was nothing. My breath caught. I tried again, desperate, like searching for a tool that should be in my pocket. Blank. Tears stung my eyes, sudden and humiliating. I pressed my palm to my mouth to smother the sound that wanted to come out. Kalian looked at me, and the guilt in his eyes deepened into something like grief. It took something, he said quietly. I couldn't answer. I only nodded once, because if I opened my mouth, I feared I would howl. The ash-haired scout's voice came strained. My prince, the border wards are failing. We saw frost on the trees, in daylight. Kalian's face hardened. Then we go now, he said. No delays. If the court wants to call her a curse, they can do it behind stone walls with every ward they have left. He started to stand, then swayed, pain flickering across his features as his wrist throbbed. He glanced down at the old scar, now faintly red as if newly irritated. And when he looked back at me, his voice dropped low enough that only I could hear. It followed the snap, Leora. Not fully, but enough. Outside the hollow, the forest wind changed, carrying a scent of iron on winter air, and somewhere beyond the trees, something chimed like bone branches in a place that shouldn't exist. As we began to move toward the moon court, I realized with a cold certainty that the next door the nightmare would try to open was not in the borderlands. It was at the court's own gates. The forest tried to pretend it was ordinary again, but it couldn't keep the lie together. As we left the hollow, the air carried a thin, metallic scent that didn't belong to pine or earth. Frost clung to leaves despite the sun, not the soft white frost of cold mornings, but a dark rime that looked almost bruised. Every now and then, I heard a faint chiming from nowhere, like glass tapping bone, and each time my rune answered with a hot pulse that made my vision sharpen too much, as if the world wanted to turn into the nightmare version of itself. Kalian kept us moving fast. Malus, the ash-haired scout, walked ahead, scattering moon salt in small pinches at crossroads and murmuring ward phrases under her breath. The bowman, Soren, moved behind me, arrow already knocked half the time, his eyes constantly scanning the spaces between trees as if expecting them to open like mouths. I tried to focus on my footsteps, on the feel of earth under my boots, but my mind kept circling back to the blank space where my mother's song used to live. It wasn't only that I couldn't remember it. It was that my chest still reacted as if the song were there. The shape of the comfort remained, but the sound was gone, like a familiar room after someone has stripped the furniture out. When I swallowed against the sting in my eyes, Kalian noticed. He didn't ask again what I gave. He only shifted closer to me, close enough that his shadow cut the harshness of the light for a moment. And he said quietly, "Keep breathing. Keep your mind in your hands, in your feet. Don't go searching for what's missing." That almost made me laugh, because what else does a mind do when it's bleeding? But I nodded, because his voice was the only thing that felt solid. We reached the riverlands by late afternoon. The trees thinned, the ground rose, and the pale cliffs of the moon court appeared like a wall of frozen dawn across the horizon. Even from far away, the court looked unreal. White stone veined with silver, terraces carved into the cliff face like steps for giants, and above it all, a crescent-shaped arch that caught the last sun and held it like trapped light. It should have filled me with awe. Instead, my rune began to burn. The closer we got, the hotter it pulsed, as if the court itself were a bell, and my mark a hammer poised to strike. I pressed my scarf against my forehead, but covering it only made the itch worse, like hiding embers under cloth. Soren noticed my flinch. He muttered, "It doesn't like holy stone." Kalian's gaze sharpened, or it recognizes it. Mylis glanced back, face drawn. That's not better. We approached the outer gate at dusk. The gate was not a simple arch. It was a massive ring of moonstone set into the cliff, carved with countless tiny runes that shimmered faintly as darkness gathered. On either side stood guards in pale armor, their helms shaped like crescent moons. Their spears were tipped with silver. The moment I stepped onto the threshold stones, the runes on the gate flared brighter, like they'd been waiting for a signal, and my rune answered. Heat slammed through my skull, and for an instant, I saw the crown again, a shadowed halo with a thin silver rim, hovering just above my brow. The nearest guard stiffened. His spear snapped up. Hold. All movement stopped around me as if the air had frozen. Kalian stepped forward without hesitation. Lower your weapon, he commanded. The guard's eyes widened. My prince, we did not expect you back until moonrise patrol ends. Kalian didn't look away from the spear. Lower it. The guard obeyed, but his gaze flicked to my forehead, to the faint glow seeping from beneath my scarf. Another guard beside him began to chant. Softly, a ward call I didn't recognize, and the gate runes brightened again in response. Mylis leaned in toward Kalian, urgent. They'll lock the ring. If they seal it while she's on the threshold, it could tear the boundary. Kalian's jaw tightened. Open the gate fully, he ordered, voice carrying authority that brooked no argument. The guards hesitated. A third figure appeared on the terrace above, stepping into view like someone answering a silent alarm. She wore a long, pale cloak trimmed with silver fur, and her hair was white blonde, braided and pinned with moonstone needles. Her face was sharp, beautiful, and colder than the stone she stood on. Her eyes found Kalian first, then they found me. They narrowed slightly, not in confusion, but in recognition that made my stomach drop. Prince Kalian, she called down. What have you brought to my gate? Kalian's shoulders went rigid. Warden Lysara. So that was the name behind the court's rumor. The one who had sealed dream-sick nobles in their rooms and ordered whole wings of the palace abandoned when the screaming wouldn't stop. The one who believed safety was worth any cruelty. Kalian lifted his chin. A citizen seeking aid, and a threat already inside our borders if we continue pretending it's not. Lysara descended the steps with measured grace, stopping just outside the ring. The gate's runes reflected in her eyes like cold fire. She studied me with the precision of a blade. Remove the cloth, she said. My throat tightened. Every instinct screamed to hide. Kalian's voice cut in, sharp. She is under my protection. Lysara's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Protection is not permission. If she carries a nightmare mark, the court must know before she crosses. Kalian's gaze was a warning. And if she is the only tool we have left to close what's opening. Lysara's eyes flicked to his wrist, to the place beneath his glove. For a heartbeat, something like understanding crossed her face. Then it hardened into calculation. I felt suddenly exposed, not only by fear, but by being discussed as if I were a weapon laid on a table. My hands trembled as I untied the scarf. The cold evening air touched my forehead, and my rune glowed openly, faint, but undeniable. A sharp inhale went through the guards. Lysara's pupils tightened. Nightmare rune, she said softly, and the softness was far more dangerous than anger. A waking mark. Behind her composure I saw it, a kind of relief, not because I was safe, but because I confirmed a theory. She lifted 2 fingers and traced a quick symbol in the air. Instantly, a shimmer rose across the gate ring like a curtain of light. The runes blazed, and my crown silhouette flashed again above my brow, clearer than ever. The gate's shimmer responded to it like iron to a magnet. The air snapped. A soundless pressure rolled outward from the ring, and every torch along the terrace flared blue-white for an instant. Somewhere inside the court, a bell began to toll, slow and deep, as if the stone itself had noticed an old wound reopening. Malus swore under her breath. The ring is singing. Lysera's expression went tight. She lowered her hand, and the shimmer eased, but the runes stayed brighter than before. Kalian leaned toward me, voice low. Do not look into any reflective surface once we're inside. The court is full of moon mirrors. If it followed the snap, it will try to use them. My stomach churned. Like doors, like mouths. Lysera stepped aside at last. Bring her in, she said to the guards. But she does not go to the public halls. She goes to the night atrium, under ward and watch. If she so much as dreams, we bind her mind in iron light. Kalian's eyes flashed. You will not chain her like an animal. Lysera's gaze stayed on my rune. If she is a crown, my prince, then she is a crown in a war. Crowns are not pampered. They are guarded, used, and if necessary, buried. The words struck like a slap. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to work. I am standing right here. Lysera looked at me fully then, and the cold in her eyes made my skin prickle. Then speak like one who understands what you are, she said, because the thing that marked you is already pressed against our walls. As if to prove her point, the air near the gate ring suddenly chilled. A thin frost spidered across the moonstone, forming patterns that looked too much like jagged slashes. My rune burned, and from somewhere deep in the court, a distant scream rose, cut off abruptly as if someone had clapped a hand over a mouth. Every guard stiffened. Kalian's face went hard. Open the path. Now. They ushered us through the ring. The moment I crossed fully, the gate's runes pulsed once, like a heartbeat recognizing blood, and somewhere behind my eyes, I felt a presence shift closer, as if it had just stepped through with me, unseen. As we walked into the moon court's shadowed corridors, past moonlit fountains and pale stone statues whose eyes seemed too reflective, I realized the nightmare wasn't trying to keep me out anymore. It was letting me in, because the court was full of doors, and it intended to teach everyone here what my village had already learned, that a crown can be a curse, depending on who tries to place it on your head. They led me through corridors that gleamed like frozen moonlight. The moon court wasn't warm stone and living wood like my village. It was carved precision. Every arch felt intentional, every torch flame steady, every footstep absorbed by pale rugs that softened sound as if the palace preferred secrets. And everywhere there were reflections, polished wall panels, glassy inlays in the floor, still pools set into alcoves. Even the eyes of statues caught light and threw it back at you. Kalian stayed close enough that his shoulder brushed mine. Whenever the hall bent, as if he was positioning his body between me and every mirror. Do not look, he murmured again. I tried, truly, but when you are told not to look, every reflective surface becomes a mouth you feel moving even if you refuse to face it. As we passed a long gallery lined with moon mirrors, I kept my gaze fixed on the stone tiles. In the corner of my vision, I saw the faint halo shape above my brow, like a shadow crown hovering in the glass. I felt the presence behind my eyes lean forward. Pleased, give it back, it whispered in my voice without sound. Let them bury you. You'll never have to be afraid again. My rune pulsed hot. My stomach tightened. Malus led us down a narrower stair, away from the public terraces and the brighter halls. The air grew cooler. The stone smelled faintly of old water and something metallic, like coins left too long in a damp pocket. At the bottom of the stair was a door without ornament, only a small carved crescent above the lintel, cracked by 3 jagged slashes. My breath caught. Kalian saw my reaction. His mouth tightened. The night atrium. The door opened without a handle, responding to Milas's whispered phrase. Cold air washed over us, carrying the scent of night flowers and iron light. Inside, the chamber was round and high-ceilinged, open at the top to a circle of sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. A shallow pool lay at the center, perfectly still, like black glass. Around it stood pillars threaded with silver veins that glowed faintly, and between the pillars hung thin curtains of dark cloth. To cover the mirrors, I realized. To starve the thing that followed me. Lysera was already there. She stood at the far side of the pool, hands folded, cloak pale against the shadows. Behind her, 2 robed mages waited beside a low pedestal that held a coil of something that looked like braided light. Iron light, Kalian had called it. Lysera's gaze flicked to my forehead and then to Kalian's wrist, as if checking that we still matched her worst expectations. Bring her to the ring, she said. Milas scattered moon salt in a wide circle near the pool. The salt didn't lie like normal powder. It shimmered, as if each grain held a pinprick of moon. When I stepped inside, the rune on my brow flared once, and the air thickened, as if the circle had teeth. The robed mages lifted the iron light coil. It unfurled into thin strands that hovered in the air like luminous vines. I tensed. My hands curled into fists. Kalian moved instantly. "No," he said. "Not yet." Lysara's head tilted. "You think you can negotiate with a breach?" His voice sharpened. "I think you can listen to someone who has survived one." For a moment, the chamber held its breath. Even the pool seemed to darken. Then Lysara's eyes narrowed slightly. "Speak." Kalian looked at me, then back to her. "She is not a prisoner. She is a boundary. If you bind her mind in iron light before she understands the crown, you'll make her fear it. And fear is how the nightmare steers." Lysara's mouth tightened. "And if she dreams and opens the gate wider?" Kalian's answer came cold. "Then we were already dead and didn't know it." Silence stretched. Lysara finally lifted 2 fingers, and the mages lowered the iron light coil to the pedestal. Not bound. Not yet. She stepped closer to the ring, watching me as if I were a blade laid on a table. "Tell me the first thing you lost." The question hit like a punch. My throat tightened. Kalian's gaze flicked to me, warning and regret tangled together. He knew what she was asking. He knew the price. I forced the words out. "A song. My mother's song. I can't remember it." Lysara's eyes didn't soften. They sharpened, as if that confirmed a calculation. "The crown takes payment," she said, "and it always takes what you would trade anything to keep." I swallowed hard. "Then why call it a crown at all?" "Because crowns are never free," Lysara said. "People just pretend they are." Kalian's jaw flexed. "Enough. Tell us what you know." Lysara's gaze slid to the pool, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight older than the court's stone. "There is a gate beneath this palace," she said. "Not a door you can touch. A seam. It was sealed long ago by a bearer of the night crown. When the dream plague began, we thought it was sickness. It is not sickness. It is pressure against that seal." She looked at my forehead. "Your mark is the seal recognizing that it is failing, or the thing beyond it, announcing that it has found a matching key." My stomach rolled. "So I'm not the first." Kalian's hand tightened slightly on my wrist, grounding me. "No," Lysara said. "You are the first in generations to wake with it." The pool at the center of the chamber rippled once. No breeze moved. No one touched it. A single ring spread outward, slow and deliberate. My rune burned hot as if someone had pressed a coal against my skin. I fought the urge to turn and look into the water. Kalian moved between me and the pool without thinking. Shoulders squared. The water stilled again. Lysara's voice lowered. "It followed you in." As if to prove her right, the dark curtains around the chamber trembled. One of them lifted slightly, though no hand touched it, revealing a sliver of mirror behind. In that thin strip of reflected light, I saw my own face, and above my brow, clearer than ever, the crown hovered, like a shadow halo edged in silver. My reflection smiled. I did not. The reflection's lips moved without sound, but I understood the meaning as clearly as if it had whispered into my ear. "They will bind you. They will bury you. Give it back, and I will give you the song. Give it back, and I will spare your mother." My chest seized. My heart tried to sprint out of my ribs. I could not see my mother, could not know what was happening in my village. And the threat landed in the hollow space where the stolen melody used to be. My knees went weak. Kalian's hand snapped to my shoulder. "Leora, don't." The curtain lifted higher, as if delighted by my hesitation. The mirror strip widened, and from the glass, frost began to creep. Not white frost, dark rime, bruised and jagged, forming the familiar slashes. The rune on my brow pulsed in perfect time with it. Melis swore, drawing her blade. "It's using the mirror." One of the robed mages raised a hand to pull the curtain shut, but the fabric jerked away from him like it was alive. The mirror strip widened again. A hand pressed outward from inside the glass. Not flesh, not bone, shadow shaped like a hand, pushing as if the mirror were thin ice. The chamber's silver veins flared. The moon-salt ring shimmered. The pool went perfectly still, reflecting the open sky like an eye. Kalian shouted, "Cover it now!" The mage lunged again. The shadow hand thrust through the mirror with a silent crack, fingers stretching toward the mage's throat. I didn't think. I moved. I lifted my palm toward the mirror the way I had lifted it over the dream sea, and I spoke with everything in me that was not fear. "No." The crown flared above my brow. Silver-edged darkness flashed across my vision. The shadow hand froze mid-reach, as if it had struck an invisible wall. Pain lanced behind my eyes. The blank space in my mind widened, hungry to become 2 blank spaces. I clenched my jaw and pushed harder. Close. The mirror strip shuddered. The shadow hand trembled, then snapped backward, sucked into the glass as if the mirror had inhaled it. The curtain slammed down at the same moment, sealing the reflection away. The chamber went silent, except for my ragged breathing. I swayed, dizzy, and Kalian Caught me before I fell. Lysera stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. Not approval, not pity, recognition. The kind that looks like fear wearing a scholar's mask. "It is waking in you," she said quietly. My forehead throbbed. My mouth felt full of ash. I tried to steady myself with something familiar, something small. I thought of my mother's face, the way she looked at me that morning, and suddenly, I couldn't picture her eyes. I froze. My breath stopped halfway in. I tried again, desperate, reaching for the memory like someone reaching for a hand in the dark. Her outline was there, her hands, the smell of bread, but her eyes were a blur, as if someone had smudged paint across them. A sob rose in my throat, sharp and involuntary. Kalian's grip tightened, and his voice came low and fierce beside my ear. What did it take this time? I couldn't answer, because I didn't know how to. Explain that the crown wasn't only eating my memories, it was eating the parts of me that made those memories matter. Lysera stepped closer, voice calm as winter. "Midnight," she said. "We go beneath the court to the gate. If you can close a mirror mouth in the atrium, you might be able to reinforce the seal." My throat worked. "And if I can't?" Lysera's eyes held mine, cold and honest. "Then we will learn whether you are a crown that protects us, or a crown that ends us." Kalian's jaw clenched, anger flashing. "She is not a tool." Lysera didn't look at him. "Then stop pretending she has another choice." I turned my gaze upward to the circle of sky above the atrium, where stars were brightening one by one. Somewhere far away, beyond these stone walls, my village slept under trees that remembered my footsteps. And I couldn't remember my mother's eyes. The thought landed with a terrible clarity. Whatever happens at midnight, I won't walk out of it unchanged. And the worst part was that the crown above my brow pulsed like a heartbeat, as if it agreed, as if it was already counting what it would take next. Midnight did not arrive like a time. It arrived like a presence. Even inside the night atrium, where the sky was a circle cut into stone, the air shifted as the stars climbed. The silver veins in the pillars brightened, then dimmed, then brightened again in a rhythm that didn't match any torch or moon. The pool at the center stayed still, but the stillness felt tense, like a held breath. I sat on a low bench within the moon's salt ring while Malus and the mages moved around the chamber, tightening curtains, checking wards, murmuring to each other in clipped phrases. Soren stood near the door with his bow, eyes never settling in one place for long. Lysera watched all of it without moving, her face composed as a statue. Kalian stayed close enough that I could feel his warmth when he shifted. He didn't touch me unless I swayed. He didn't speak unless he had to, but the silence between us wasn't empty. It was packed with unsaid things, heavy enough to bow my shoulders. I tried again, quietly, to remember my mother's eyes. I knew she had eyes. I knew they were kind. I knew the exact shape of her hands, and the way flour dusted. Her wrists. But when I reached for her gaze, my mind returned only a blur, like a candle seen through fog. Terror rose in me, sharp and childish. I clenched my fists until my nails bit my palms. The crown above my brow pulsed faintly, unseen by most but felt by me like a second heartbeat. It was hungry, not for blood, for meaning. Kalian noticed my rigid posture. His voice came low, careful. "Stop digging at the wound." I turned my head, eyes stinging. "If I don't keep trying, it will be easier for it to take everything," I whispered. His jaw flexed. "Or you'll exhaust yourself offering it scraps." He paused, then added softer, "I'm sorry." The words hit harder than any apology should, because they carried history, because they implied he had known what the crown costs and had still let me put my hand on the door. Before I could demand what he meant, Lysera spoke without looking at us. "It is time." The mages opened the door, and cold air poured in from the corridor beyond, not the clean cold of stone, a thinner cold that smelled faintly of iron, like the borderlands, like a place that shouldn't have been under this palace. Malus stepped forward, blade sheathed now but her shoulders tight. "The path is cleared, Warden. The mirrors along the descent are veiled." "Veiled is not sealed," Lysera replied. Her gaze finally came to me. "You will walk in the center. Do not touch the walls. Do not speak to any voice you hear in your head. If you feel yourself leaning toward sleep, you tell us immediately." I swallowed. "And if I feel something leaning toward me?" Lysera's expression didn't change. "Then you will learn how quickly you can say no." Kalian's voice cut in, controlled but edged. "She will not be alone. The tether stays." Lysera's eyes flicked to our wrists, where the silver binding had been replaced with a thinner strand, less visible, woven beneath our sleeves. For a moment, I thought she would forbid it. Instead, she said, "If he falls with her, that is his choice." We left the atrium. The corridors down were narrower, older, their stone darker, as if the lower levels had been built before the court decided it preferred moonlight to shadow. Curtains hung over alcoves where mirrors might have been. Even veiled, I could feel them. It was like walking past sleeping mouths. Halfway down, the first scream came. It wasn't loud. It was muffled, cut short, like someone had bitten their own tongue to keep from making noise. Soren's bow snapped up. Malus paused, listening. Another sound followed. Not a scream this time. A laugh, soft and wrong, echoing from behind a closed door. Lysera didn't break stride. Keep moving. I stared at the door as we passed. The laughter slid under the wood like smoke. My rune warmed, responding, as if whatever laughed recognized the mark in my skin. Kalian's hand brushed my elbow, guiding me forward. "Don't look back," he murmured. We descended a spiral stair that seemed to go too deep for a palace built into cliffs. The air grew damper. The silver veins in the stone around us brightened in thin lines like roots. At the bottom of the stair was another door, massive, sealed with a circle of metal that glowed faintly. Not moonstone, not silver, ironlight. The mages spread out, palms lifted. Their murmurs thickened into a chant that made the hair on my arms rise. The metal circle warmed, and the door trembled once, as if it were alive and irritated by being touched. Then it opened inward, with the slow reluctance of something that had not been opened in a long time. Cold rolled out, not air, presence. My rune flared. The crown above my brow sharpened in my mind as if it was bracing itself. We stepped through into a vast chamber carved directly from bedrock. The ceiling was low and jagged, studded with crystals that caught the iron light and threw it back in dull glints. The floor was carved with concentric circles of runes, some filled with silver, some with darker metal. At the center was a seam in the air. It looked like a crack in the world. Not a doorway you could walk through, but a thin vertical line of darkness that did not reflect light. It ran from floor to ceiling like a wound. Around it, the runes pulsed faintly, as if holding the crack shut through sheer stubbornness. The sight of it turned my stomach, because the seam felt familiar. I had seen it in the dream sea, opening like an eye. This was the waking world version of that eye, sealed, bandaged, and still trying to blink. Lysera stopped at the outermost rune circle. "This is the gate." Her voice was calm, but I saw the tightness in her shoulders now, the way her fingers flexed once at her sides. Fear lived in her too. She just wore it like armor. Kalian stepped beside me. "Do you feel it?" I did. The seam pressed against my thoughts like a fingertip against a bruise. The crown responded with a slow pulse, as if greeting an old enemy, and beneath it all, a whisper slid through my mind in my own voice. "Put it on properly." I clenched my jaw. Malus drew a short blade and cut her palm, letting a few drops of blood fall into a small groove in the rune circle. The blood hissed as it touched the metal, turning briefly silver before it sank and disappeared. The wards acknowledged her sacrifice. Then the seam moved, not widening, not opening, quivering, like a throat about to speak. A thin frost crept across the nearest rune lines, dark rime forming jagged slashes, the same slashes as my mark, the same pattern as Kalian's scar. Soren's voice came strained. "It's already pressing." Lysera looked directly at me. "Crown bearer, step forward." My legs didn't want to move. Kalian's hand found mine. His grip was steady, grounding, but I felt a tremor in him too, like a memory waking under skin. I stepped into the second ring. The moment my foot crossed the line, the seam flared with a faint inner glow, not light but depth, like a well you could fall into forever. My rune burned, and the crown above my brow became suddenly heavy, as if it had settled more firmly onto my head. A voice rose from the seam, not loud, clear, Leora. My blood went cold. It wasn't the nightmare's pressure speaking without words. This was a voice shaped like sound, slipping out of the crack as if the crack had lips. It said my name the way someone says it when they are smiling. Kalian swore under his breath. "Don't answer." The voice continued gentle. "You are tired. You've already paid. Give it back, and you can go home. Give it back, and you can remember her eyes." My chest tightened so hard it hurt. The offer slid straight into the blank space in me like a knife into a soft fruit. I stared at the seam, breathing through my teeth. Lysera's voice snapped. "Do not engage. Place your hand over the rune line and command the seal." Command. I lifted my palm, but it shook. The crown pulsed, impatient. Kalian leaned close, voice low enough that only I could hear. "Don't try to force it shut. That's what it wants. It wants you to strain until you pay everything." "Then what do?" I whispered, throat raw. Kalian's answer came like a confession. "You bind it to truth, not to strength." My eyes flicked to him. What truth? His gaze held mine, and something in it was fierce and broken at once. That it marked me first, that I didn't destroy it. I hid it. I pretended silence was victory. The seam pulsed, as if listening. Kalian's jaw clenched. It has been waiting for me to speak that out loud. My pulse spiked. You brought me here because you wanted to end your silence. His face tightened. I brought you because it woke in you and I couldn't let you face it alone. But, yes, he swallowed. Yes, I have been running from this for years. The seam vibrated. The voice inside it turned warmer, almost delighted. 2 crowns, 2 bearers, 1 throne. My mouth went dry. Lysara's eyes snapped to Kalian. What is it saying? Kalian didn't look away from the seam. The truth, he said. The part we've refused. The frost spread faster across the rune lines. My rune flared. The crown above my brow sharpened until it felt like a blade resting against my skull. The seam widened a hair's breadth, and through that hair's breadth, something looked back. Not a face. An emptiness shaped like a face, waiting for features, waiting for mine. Kalian's hand tightened on mine until it hurt. Leora, he whispered, if it takes your name here, it won't need mirrors anymore. It will use the gate itself. My lungs burned. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. I wanted my mother's song. I wanted her eyes. Instead, I did the only thing I could still choose. I lifted my hand and pressed it to the rune line carved into the stone. The metal was cold enough to sting. The seam pulsed, pulling at my thoughts, trying to hook into my longing. I did not push back with strength. I pushed back with refusal. I am not your door, I said aloud, voice shaking but clear in the cavern. I am not your bride. I am not your throne. The crown flared. Pain lanced behind my eyes, and something tore loose inside me again. A memory trying to rise and be eaten. I clenched my teeth and held on harder, refusing to bargain, refusing to offer what I loved. The seam shuddered. For one heartbeat, it seemed to recoil. Then it laughed, not from a mouth, from the stone itself, vibrating through the runes. And the voice spoke again, no longer gentle. Then choose what you will lose next, crown bearer, because I am already inside your walls. The iron light circle around the door behind us flickered. Somewhere above, in the palace corridors, a chorus of muffled screams began, as if dozens of throats had opened at once. Lysara's composure cracked. Her eyes went wide. Kalian's face went hard. It's splitting the court. Mirrors, pools, statues, every reflection. My hand stayed pressed to the rune line, trembling. The crown burned. The seam quivered like a throat about to swallow. And in that instant, I understood the true horror. Closing the gate beneath the court would not save them if the nightmare had already learned to wear our own faces in every shining surface above. The war wasn't waiting beyond the seam anymore. It was unfolding on both sides at once, and the only way to stop it might be to do what the crown was built for, not simply to seal a door, but to walk into the doorway and decide who comes out. The screams above us came in waves. Not one person, not one room. A chorus scattered through the palace like sparks through dry leaves. Somewhere overhead, something shattered, followed by the unmistakable rush of feet and the clang of guards trying to sound brave while their own reflections hunted them. Lysara's composure didn't break again, but the tightness in her jaw did. She lifted her hand toward the mages. Iron light. Now. The braided coil on the pedestal rose, luminous strands floating like living vines, reaching for me. Kalian stepped between it and my face. If you bind her mind, you bind the crown, he snapped. And if you bind the crown, you hand it a handle. Lysara's eyes flashed. If I do nothing, we lose the court. Kalian's voice turned low and dangerous. We're losing it anyway. The seam in front of us quivered, and a thin whisper slid through the crack, soft as a lover's breath. Remember her eyes. My stomach clenched. My rune burned. The crown above my brow pulsed, heavy and impatient, as if it had grown tired of being argued over. I looked at the crack in the world and understood, with a cold clarity that felt like falling. The nightmare wasn't just trying to open the gate. It was using me as the hinge. I swallowed hard and stepped forward before anyone could stop me, crossing into the innermost. Ring until the rune lines were directly under my boots, and the seam was close enough that the air around it felt like a cold mouth. Kalian's hand shot out. Leora, I didn't look away from the seam. If I close it from here, I said, voice shaking, will it stop using the mirrors? Lysara's answer came sharp and honest. If you can force everything it has pushed through to return, yes. If you only seal the crack, no. It will keep what it has already. Spread. Keep what it has spread. Faces, voices, hunger wearing familiar shapes. The palace above us screamed again, and this time I heard my own name in one of the cries, twisted into something sweet and wrong. My throat tightened. Then I don't seal it, I whispered. I pull it back. Kalian's eyes widened. You can't just grab the plague by the throat. I stared at the seam. It called me crown. It thinks it owns that word. so I take the word away. The crown above my brow sharpened in my mind, and I felt its price waiting like a blade at my throat. Kalian's hand tightened on the tether beneath our sleeves. Leora, if you step too close, it will try to name you. If it takes your true name here, then I don't give it one, I said, and my voice surprised even me with its steadiness. I turned my head slightly and met Kalian's eyes. You said it obeys names, so I will not be a name it can hold. His breath hitched. Don't, he said, and it wasn't command, it was plea, but I was already choosing. I lifted my hand and touched my forehead, right over the nightmare rune, and I spoke the truth I could still claim. My name is not yours. The crown flared. Pain exploded behind my eyes, and for a moment, I thought I would vomit light. Something inside my skull loosened. A thread tugged hard, and I felt my own name begin to slip, not from my tongue, but from the roots of me, from the place where identity lives. Terror surged, the instinct to clutch it, to keep it, to stay intact. But I remembered the blur where my mother's eyes should be. I remembered the blank space where her song used to live. The nightmare was already eating me, so I fed the crown something it could use. I let go of the idea that I could remain untouched. My name slid out of me like breath leaving lungs. For a heartbeat, I could see it in the air, a thin ribbon of light curling away from my mouth, and I could feel the seam lean toward it. Eager, Kalian swore, a broken sound. Leora. I didn't answer, because the answer would have been my name, and I no longer had it. The ribbon of light snapped upward into the crown above my brow, not into the seam. The crown caught it like a hook catches thread, and the seam recoiled. It wanted my name to hold me. Instead, my name became part of the crown's law. The air changed. The crack in the world stopped feeling like a mouth. It started feeling like a boundary line, sharp and cold. Lysera's voice went tight. What have you done? I lifted my palm toward the seam and spoke with a steadiness that didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like the crown speaking through me. Return what you stole. The seam trembled. Above us, the palace screams shifted, as if something had suddenly tugged on every shadow at once. I felt it like hooks in my skin. The nightmare's tendrils connected to mirrors and pools and statue eyes, all pulling against me, resisting. The crown burned, demanding payment for the command. Something else in me began to slip. Not another memory, not another song. My reflection. I felt it tear away, a strange sensation like skin peeled from glass. Somewhere above, I heard a chorus of startled shouts, as mirrors across the court went suddenly dark, not reflecting faces, only empty light. Kalian stared at me, horror and awe tangled on his face. Your reflection, he whispered. I didn't have time to mourn it. I could feel the nightmare fighting, pushing back through the crack with pressure like a tide. I pressed my palm closer, almost against the seam, and the cold bit into my bones. Return, I repeated, and the word struck like a hammer. The seam shuddered, and suddenly the air filled with motion. Shadows streamed downward through the stone, as if the palace itself were bleeding smoke. The nightmare's borrowed voices snapped back in strings, yanked from throats and glass. The screams above us cut off abruptly, replaced by gasps, coughing, sobbing, as people woke from a waking nightmare with no idea how close they had come to opening their mouths and letting something step through. The faceless hunger behind the seam slammed against the boundary, furious, and it spoke again, no longer gentle. Then what are you, crown-bearer, if you have no name and no face in glass? The question hit hard, aimed for emptiness. I swayed, the crown heavy as a mountain. Kalian stepped closer, bracing me with his shoulder. You are here, he said fiercely, as if he could force the world to keep me solid by sheer insistence. You are not nothing. I stared into the crack and felt the pull of it, the temptation to fall through and end the struggle by becoming part of the darkness. I thought of my mother again, not her eyes, not her song, but the feeling of her kiss beside the mark, the defiance in it. Love without details is still love, I realized, and the realization broke something open in me that the nightmare couldn't reach. I lifted my chin. I am the boundary, I said, voice raw, and I decide. The crown flared one final time, brighter than the iron light, and the rune lines under my feet blazed, silver flooding the grooves like liquid moon. The seam snapped shut, not gently, with a crack that rang through bedrock like thunder. The cold presence vanished, as if a hand had clenched into a fist and pulled itself away. Silence fell. Then, above us, a bell tolled once, slow and clear. Not a warning bell this time, but a signal that something sealed had finally held. My knees buckled. Kalian caught me and lowered me carefully to the stone, hands steady even though his wrist trembled where his old scar lay hidden. His breath came hard, like he'd been fighting in water. Lysara stepped forward, eyes wide in a way she couldn't hide now. "The gate is sealed," she whispered. Malus stared at the rune lines still glowing faintly, and the reflections. Lysara's voice went tight. "Quiet. The palace is quiet." Soren let out a shaky breath he'd been holding for too long. Gods. I pressed my hand to my forehead. The rune was still raised, but the burning had eased into a dull warmth, like embers in ash. The crown above my brow was still there. I could feel it, but lighter now, settled. Kalian leaned close, eyes searching my face. "Say your name," he whispered, desperate. "Just say it." I opened my mouth. Nothing came. I knew I had once been called something. I knew it mattered, but the sound was gone, like my mother's melody. Tears spilled hot down my cheeks before I could stop them. I shook my head, shaking, ashamed and grieving all at once. Kalian's expression crumpled, and for the first time I saw him not as a prince, but as someone who had lived too long with a wound and was watching it spread to someone else. He lifted my hand and pressed it to his chest over his heart. "Then I will give you a name that belongs to you," he said softly. "One it cannot steal." Lysara watched us, face unreadable, then turned away as if granting privacy was her version of mercy. "The court will want answers," she said. "They will want to call her hero or hazard. I will not let them touch her tonight." Kalian's gaze didn't leave mine. He didn't blink, as if he feared I might vanish if he did. When he spoke again, his voice was barely more than breath. "I will call you Aster, Star, because even with no reflection, even with pieces taken, you still held the dark back." The word settled into me gently, not like a brand, but like a cloak placed over shaking shoulders. I could not tell if it was my true name, but it was a name I could hold. I swallowed, voice hoarse. "Will I ever remember her eyes?" Kalian's throat worked. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know this. Your mother is alive because you chose to lose something instead of letting it take everything." I closed my eyes, letting the truth of that wash through the grief. When I opened them again, the cavern felt less like a grave and more like a foundation. I stood, unsteady but standing, and followed Kalian up the spiral stair toward the palace that had stopped screaming. In the high corridors of the moon court, servants and guards stared at me with fear, then with awe, then with the complicated silence people use when they don't know how to speak to someone who has survived something they can't imagine. I walked past mirrors veiled in cloth, and when one curtain shifted in a stray draft, revealing a sliver of glass, it showed only empty hallway light. No face, no eyes, no crown, just absence where I should have been. The loss hit like a bruise. Kalian's hand found mine. "Still here," he murmured, grounding me. We reached a balcony that overlooked the cliffs. Dawn was beginning to bleed into the horizon, vivid and unreal, painting the sky in deep violet, molten gold, and cold blue, like the world was healing itself with color. The first sunlit edge touched the moon court's white stone, and for the first time since the rune appeared, my forehead did not burn at the light. I breathed in the cold air. Somewhere far away, I could not remember the exact sound of my mother's voice, but I could feel the shape of her love like warmth in my ribs. I turned my face toward the growing day. I had been marked by a nightmare rune, but I was still standing, and behind me, Kalian's voice came soft, steady, like a vow spoken into morning. "Aster," he said, "my crown."